the years by the beginning. She's a pin.
The reason I know is because I'm wearing, I had to do it myself.
I know, right?
Oh well.
Yeah, she just had some work obligations.
Even just holding it makes you look like someone like, oh, I can talk to you.
Is this your place?
Oh,
Who is running this?
It's outside.
Can you turn it up, honey? Is that possible? Okay, how about now? It's lovely to meet you. And also, those of you in New Hampshire, you're here. You know what this scene is. This is what presidential campaign season is. But I want those of you on live stream to know, because this is the exercise of democracy in a way that I think some Americans don't know. So just in case you don't, I want you to know. There are 4 early primary states, although now California technically is, because the early voting starts the same day as the Iowa caucus, and then after that, 1 week later, is the New Hampshire primary. And this is very amusing to those of us. Can they please turn this up? Okay. So for those who are, for people who are not either in Iowa or New Hampshire, there's a rather amusing competitive spirit, because New Hampshire is the first primary, but I was the week before as a caucus. So the point here, the serious point here, is that these 4 states, and I'm talking just into the camera for this information because everybody else knows this, so these 4 states, now California, really do make serious decisions, because who wins these caucuses, these primaries, that's really so huge. And then, of course, after that, are the Super Tuesday states, et cetera. So this is a great exercise in democracy, and it's very much an honor for me to participate in it. This has been an amazing experience for me so far. And in my experience, it is as though there are 2 political universes. One political universe is what we call the system, the establishment, how it works, who gets to be on debate stages, raising money, what the DNC says, what the rules are, all of that. That's one political universe. And then there's the other political universe. And the other political universe is what matters most. And too often, its significance gets pushed aside. And that political universe is what you and I are doing here today. And one of the reasons, you know, so I think of those rights, not only in terms of what a privilege it is to get to participate in this process, but also, and this is central to what I want to talk to you about, we don't just have the rights that I just articulated and all of the other rights that we know go along with American citizenship. I think that this citizenship also brings a profound responsibility. And I think that we as a generation have lost a sense of our responsibility. And one of the things, the thing is, responsibility, a sense of responsibility comes along with power. But Hampshire. You know, a lot of the abolitionists, the early abolitionist movement began here in New Hampshire. The early evangelicals, the early Quakers. The U.S. government didn't wake up and say, let's end slavery. No, the people rose up and the people stepped in. And the U.S. government didn't wake up one day and say, let's give women the right to vote. The people rose up and the people stepped in. And the U.S. government did not say, let's desegregate the American South and end institutionalized white supremacy. The people rose up and the people stepped in. The political status quo does not repair itself. This is not about individuals, but it is about systems. And the system, this is not the individuals, but the system is more than recalcitrant. That system right now, there is something so entrenched. Now, this is the deal. What do we have to do? I think all of us would agree, or most of us would agree anyway. First thing we need to do is make sure that a Democrat wins in 2020. But we have to be very, very careful. Because I am not just prosecuting a case against Donald Trump. I am prosecuting a case against the system that produced Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump did not create all our problems, ladies and gentlemen. Our problems created Donald Trump. And this is, we have some serious, serious thinking to do. Because if all we do is defeat Donald Trump, those same problems, they will be back in full force in 22, and they will be back in full force in 24. Not only that, the president is not just a politician. This president is a phenomenon. And I do not believe, I have great concern. I'm very concerned about whether or not an insider politics game can defeat that phenomenon. Because what Democrats, for the most part, are talking about now is how to sharpen our knives. You know, this policy or that policy, this plan or that plan. Let me tell you, the plan we need to have is how we're going to plan to defeat Donald Trump. And for that, we need to realize that the traditional political conversation, this plan, this strategy, that strategy, Democrats are sharpening their knives. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, they will be coming with big guns. Between the guns that the Republicans will be bringing, please, dear God, not literal guns, but guns of the battle, metaphorically. That's not even to mention all the guns that the Russians will probably be bringing. We need to be having a much deeper conversation than we are currently having in this campaign season. Somebody said the other day that at the second debate, I was out of my depths. I beg to differ. I'm the only one in the depths. The current political conversation is too narrow a container for the energies that we need to be releasing right now. Because the energies that we need to be releasing right now have a level of inspiration and motivation which will not emerge from same old, same old. They will not emerge from doing the same old things, having the same old conversation, and thinking this time it'll be better. Oh, the only problem was we had the wrong candidate. The only problem was James Comey. You know, I fear for any person or any institution that isn't willing to take a deeper look at itself if it wants things to change. So I want the juice in the Democratic Party that the Democratic Party had when I was growing up. Because when I was growing up, there was no equivocation. There was no moral equivocation. Unless I'm very naive and there was, and I just didn't see it. But what I remember is a political party that always facilitated democracy. It did not seek to dictate democracy. And that means that we are living at a time, just as there have been times before, whether it was the abolitionists, whether it was the women's suffragettes, or whether it was the civil rights movement. This is not the time to look to the political establishment and hope that they can save us. This is time, as it was in all three of those movements, for the people to step in. That is what needs to happen now. And that is why this whole idea that there are quote-unquote outsider candidates is outrageous. As I said before, there is no such thing in America as an outsider. Now, I'm having a conversation that is somewhat different than the traditional political candidates are having. And I'm having a different conversation because I think that only a deeper, more honest, more radically honest conversation will be enough, number one, to generate the kind of enthusiasm and inspiration that we need in order to disrupt the pattern that we are currently entrenched within, but also because I believe that only a deeper conversation will be enough to change this country. And so I'd like to talk to you about what I think of as a moral politics. I've worked for 35 years with people in crisis. And working with people in crisis has given me a lot of up-close and personal experience about how lives change. And all that a country is a bunch of people. So you can't change a country without some change happening in the people. But you see, we have a political establishment caught in this very 20th century paradigm, thinking we can change the country by just changing things on the outside. It's the old Newtonian physics, like everything's a machine and you just tweak the machine. That's not the 21st century. The 21st century is much more holistic, it's much more integrative. If you were in anything in your family, with your kids, with your spouse, with your business, with anything in life, you don't talk anymore just about how we could change things on the outside. People talk about how they feel. People talk about psychological dynamics. People know that there's more going on than just what happens on the outside. And so we as a country need to face those things that are going on underneath the surface. We paid a heavy price last time because we did not. The Republicans did and the Democrats did. The Republican establishment was gobsmacked by the success of Donald Trump, and the Democratic establishment was gobsmacked by the success of Bernie Sanders, because in both cases, neither one had any eye for what was happening underneath the surface. I feel that there is something happening underneath the surface in America, and the political establishments today are just as blind to it as the political establishments were in the last presidential election. I read an interview with Jared Kushner where Jared Kushner said that he had told his father-in-law 2 or 3 years before the last election that there were a lot of angry people out there. He said, we could harness all that and make you president. And I read that and I thought to myself, I see a lot of loving, wonderful, decent, dignified people out there. We could harness all that and change the world. And that is what is going to change this country. What's going to change this country is a rising up of conscience. What's going to change this country is a rising up of a real meaning of citizenship in a sense that each and every one of us are responsible. What's going to change this country is that each of us are going to realize that we are the equivalents in society of the immune cell. You see, we have a weakened immune system in this country. Donald Trump is like an opportunistic infection. This could never have gotten a hold of us the way it did had there not been a weakened societal immune system. We've thought, okay, I'll check in every 4 years, I'll check in every 2 years, while corporate lobbyists are checking in every hour of every day. And I'll tell you something, what all of us need to remember about personal transformation is you don't change anything until first you recognize your part in the disaster. And most politicians don't want to talk to you about your part in the disaster or what you're responsible for, but my campaign is about you and me recognizing, ladies and gentlemen, in too many ways we allowed this to happen. In too many ways we, I believe, have not lived up to the responsibilities of citizenship. In too many ways, we have allowed popular culture to distract us from the very, very serious business of being citizens of the most powerful country in the world. In too many ways, it's not that I think we're not good people, because we are good people. And it's not that I think there's any problem with the individual American. The average American is a good person. I'm not saying we're better than other people, but I don't think we're any worse than anybody else. I think we're good people. And to me, the average American does care about goodness. And the average American does care about justice. And the average American does care about compassion. And the average American does care about forgiveness. I believe those things. But what has happened over the last few years is that we have kept the conversation about what is right. What is the right thing to do? What is the good thing to do? And we have made it about our personal lives, our personal system, our personal community, but we've stopped asking about our criminal, like we act like it's somebody else's business whether our criminal justice system is good. We've acted like it's somebody else's business whether our international relationships are good. We are now participating as a country in things that would make our grandparents roll over in their graves. We are now, for instance, participating. We are participating for the sake, it's so bad, it's so corrupt, it's so deep, it's so dark, for the sake of $350 billion. $350 billion in arms sales. For that reason, we are willing to go along, our government. We are giving aerial support, ladies and gentlemen, to a genocidal war. Saudi Arabia, we all know who that man is. We all know what he did. But he is buying $350 billion in arms, so we are giving him aerial support. And he could not prosecute that war if we were not giving him that aerial support. We are giving him aerial support in a genocidal war where tens of thousands of people have starved to death in Yemen. Many of them are children whose pictures are all over the internet. Now, what's the biggest problem here? The biggest problem is that we're not talking about it all the time. That's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is not just that it's happening. And I will give credit to someone like a Bernie Sanders. There was, for that matter, not just Bernie, there was a whole bipartisan effort, actually, to stop American involvement with this. The president, however, vetoed that, and they weren't able to override the veto. If we were awake, they would. If we were awake, they would. If this was what all of us were talking about all the time, if we were calling our congresspeople, if we were calling our senators, that's where the disconnect is. The problem is not just the power of the darkness. The problem is that we are not emanating enough power of light. And the power of light is that we're on it, we care, we see it, and we're not going to be quiet. And that's what this campaign is. I'm asking you to join with me in refusing to look away. Because we have a political establishment, even in this campaign. Notice they're telling you what the issues are. Have you noticed that? Been called by any pollsters, and they're asking you how you feel about this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue. It's bad enough that they're not mentioning every candidate. Hello. It's even worse than one candidate or two candidates or three candidates not being mentioned by pollsters. They're not mentioning poverty. They're not mentioning hunger. They're not mentioning the military-industrial complex. They're not mentioning foreign affairs. They're not mentioning the trauma of America's children. They're not mentioning race. They're telling you what we're even going to talk about. You know, when I was a kid, they used to talk about Stepford wives. We become Stepford citizens. We're just towing the line. We're towing the line. And not only that, even as Democrats were towing the line, when the Democratic Party, when I was growing up, you know, it was Will Rogers said, I'm not part of an organized political party, I'm a Democrat. Very funny, actually. In other words, everybody's thinking their own way. What is this like thinking the way we're supposed to think, doing what we're supposed to do, only considering the candidates they say? It's not even that that's not the old Democratic Party, it's not even American. There's a rambunctiousness to being American. There's a revolutionary spirit to being an American. And that revolutionary spirit that we had in 1776 is the exact revolutionary spirit we need today. And let's talk about what that revolutionary spirit was. In 1776, our founders risked their lives to establish the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And I think we should all remember that by signing that document, they were risking their lives. They were risking their lives because if the British had won that war, the men who signed that document would have been executed. They would have been hanged as traitors, or worse, actually. That's why we have in our Constitution against a cruel and unusual punishment. That's a big deal. But they would have been executed, that's for sure. Now, the point is that in establishing the principles of the Declaration of Independence, they gave us America's mission statement. Now, a mission statement's a big deal. You revisit your mission statement. What's our purpose here? What's our mission? And what's happened in the United States, I believe, is that as Americans, we have failed in our generation. We've failed to emotionally and psychologically bond with it. You know, in the Jewish religion, it says, every generation must rediscover God for itself. One generation cannot just bequeath to the next values and principles. Every generation has to take them in. You know, we can say about the principles of the United States, you know, oh, they're written on marble walls or they're written on parchment somewhere. But if they're not written on our hearts, if they're not alive in us, for all intents and purposes, they're dead. And you know what happens, ladies and gentlemen, when you don't have your own principles, your own values inscribed on your heart, when you don't know where you stand on things that are most important, when you're not clear about what this is all about and where you fit in and what you're committed to, you know what happens when you don't have that? You become easy to play.
A domino.
You become easy to play because you're not really sure. You're just easy to it's like somebody blindfolds you. You don't know when to say, whoa, I don't think so. When you're clear about your values, somebody says, why don't you just come over here? And you go, no, I don't go over there. I don't go over there. But if you're not, then somebody says, oh, well, I guess it looks good. There might be candy over there. So let's go back to those principles. So those principles are that all people are created equal, that God gave all people inalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness. And this is where it really gets good. Don't forget these. Don't forget these two. Number one, governments are instituted to secure those rights. So I want you to think about all that. All people are created equal and all people have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when we start talking about the millions of traumatized children in the United States. Because you'll start thinking about, well, where is their pursuit of happiness? Children who go to school in classrooms that don't even have enough school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if they cannot learn to read by the age of 8 years old, the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. Where's their pursuit of happiness? Where's their right to pursue happiness? And then talk to me also, please, given that this is the richest country in the world, about the fact that 13 million of those children go to school every single day, food insecure, millions of American children asking the teacher, do you maybe have something to eat for me? And ladies and gentlemen, my last trip here, I went to northern New Hampshire, and I was told that in northern New Hampshire, I was told this by your political and governmental leaders, that in northern New Hampshire, and I'm going to stop for a moment because I want you to prepare your heart, because I don't want you to hear this as just a data. That's old politics. Old politics is you just hear it with your head. New politics, the politics that's going to be deep enough to transform this country, I want you to hear it, please, with your heart. 25% of all children in northern New Hampshire go to sleep hungry at night. Now, Americans are very good with a to-do list. We are characterologically really good. We like it when somebody just says, well, what do we do? What do we do? Some problems aren't that simple. Like if you look at something like World War II, we had to defeat the Nazis, we had to defeat the Japanese Imperial Army. It wasn't easy, but we knew what the task was, and so we did it. Americans brilliantly did it. This is more like a cancer because they were operable tumors. These things are more like cancers that have already metastasized. And it's not as simple as just removing it. Okay, just feed them. It's not as simple as that, because some of the cancer is wrapped around some healthy organs. Well, if you get the money from there, you got to be careful, because in the market here, we've got to be deep thinkers. And you can't just say, I'll elect some deep thinkers, because the thinkers that we have elected in too many cases are the thinkers who have perpetuated the system that got us to where we are. How can there be 13 million hungry children in American schools every day? How can there be elementary school children on suicide watch? How can there be millions of American children who suffer from a level of PTSD that psychologists tell us is as severe as the PTSD of any returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq? How can there be the obvious racial disparity in criminal sentencing that there is? How can there be the obvious racial disparity in police engagement that there is? How can there be the obvious problem with mass incarceration that there is? How can there be the obvious huge expenditures on military that we know goes beyond, above and beyond what what military says they need, just in order to provide more short-term profits for defense contractors? How can there be such an absence of an agenda to wage peace? How can there be a situation where we do not even have universal health care, even though every other advanced democracy does, simply because that would not please big pharma, that would not please health insurance companies? How can there not be proper gun safety laws? How can any of these things be true, and you and I are still sitting here considering hiring again people whose careers have been entrenched for decades in the system that drove us into this ditch? Sorry. You're nice people. You're nice people. But no. It is now a corporate-run government. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm a lifelong Democrat. If you think that's only the other party, we've got a problem here. We have one major political party that thinks that the economy of the United States should be run by a bunch of corporate aristocrats who drop crumbs from the table in the form of jobs. But too many people, even in the other major parties, say, we don't have to stand for that. You don't have to take crumbs. We'll get you a cookie. I say to you, this is America, and we all get to feast here. Yeah. We need a fundamental change in the power dynamic economically in this country. We need to, rather than see economic abundance provided by corporate aristocrats who drop crumbs from the table in forms of jobs, we need an entirely radically different approach to where money comes from. Money doesn't come from corporations who create jobs. Money comes from you getting to live your dreams, 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 and you getting to live your dreams. Money and abundance of every kind comes from the emergence of the natural productivity, creativity, goodness, and love of the American people. I don't believe in an economic system. I don't believe in an economic system in which a few corporate aristocrats drop crumbs from the table in the form of jobs. I believe in an economic system where the average American sees it this way. Give me free health care so I don't have to worry about that for myself or my kids. Give me a good education so I don't have to worry about that for me or my kids. Give me a fair shot and I'll create my own damn career. Amen. Woo! It is so paternalistic. It is so patronizing. It is not all that different than the aristocracy we rejected in 1776. We rejected a system where the power and the money and all of that belongs to this small group of people who basically just allow it to trickle down enough to keep you working for them. We're at the high end of that. We have reverted. Just like sometimes individuals regress, we've regressed. We said no to that stuff in 1776, and it is time to say no to it again. Now, some people say that's just radical. That's radical. That's radical. Okay, let me tell you about radical. Because we didn't get around to the punchline in the Declaration of Independence. All people are created equal. God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then I told you the next line, which is that governments are instituted to secure those rights. And then, drum roll, drum roll, drum roll, it says that if the government is not doing its job to provide for your safety, your happiness, and your security, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Do it. So if you have a problem with anything I say, you have a problem with the Declaration of Independence. Because you know what? Democracy is radical. And love is radical. This idea that all of us have equal opportunity, that's a radical notion. That was a radical notion in 1776. There's a reason why George III called the founders insurgents. And the issue, the mistake we made was thinking that the American Revolution was a done deal. Because the revolution, we realize now, I think, you have to tend to it generation after generation. Now, this is the deal. Of the 56 or 54, I always get confused. I have to look it up all the time. I get dyslexic on that one fact, 54, 56. Signers of the Declaration of Independence, 41 of them were slave owners. So from the beginning, we have had this dichotomy. This has been with us. This is America's characterological DNA. On one hand, we are founded on the most aspirational and enlightened principles that any country has ever been founded on. But at the same time, we have throughout our history at times been the most violent perpetrators of transgression against the principles on which we stand. That's a gnarly dichotomy. But let's talk about our historical narrative. because every generation decides for itself the story it writes in this continuing drama. We had slavery, but then a generation rose up. We had abolition. We had suppression of women, but we've had two major waves of feminism and the women's suffragette movement. The people rose up. We had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South, but then we had the civil rights movement because the people rose up. Today, we have an amoral economic system. It is not of itself immoral. It's not made up of people who wake up every morning trying to figure out ways to make your life hard. That's not what it's about. But it is an amoral economic system which has had and will continue to have, if not interrupted, immoral consequences. Because it is based on the idea that short-term profits are the responsibility, short-term profits for stockholders should be the responsibility of the U.S. corporation, even at the expense of the safety, the health, and the well-being of the American people. At our best, the U.S. government has unequivocally advocated for the people, even when that meant standing firm for boundaries, even when that meant pushing back against capitalist overreach. What has happened in the last few decades, however, is that so much money now wields so much undue influence in Washington that our government does more to advocate for those corporate profits than to advocate for us. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you have a $2 trillion tax cut, 83 cents of every dollar to the very richest Americans and very richest corporations, which there is no evidence we will ever even be able to pay off. We should repeal that. We should put back in the middle class. We should stop the middle class tax cuts. We should stop these corporate subsidies like last year. And this is your money. Last year alone, $26 billion given in corporate subsidies to oil and gas. The U.S. government actually negotiated against you by surrendering to big pharmaceutical companies its right to negotiate for lesser drug prices. And how does that happen? I'll tell you how it happens. We need to open our eyes. Last year alone, the pharmaceutical companies lobbied the United States government at a tune of $184 million. Oil and gas only lobbied at $125. You think when they spend $125 or $284 million on lobbying Congress that they're not looking for some return? And that was the return they got. The U.S. government cannot lobby, cannot negotiate for shorter drug prices. When it comes to our military, I think we would all agree that the military should get every dollar that they say that they need for legitimate security concerns. But there are hundreds of billions of dollars. It is estimated hundreds of billions of dollars over and above what the military says they need that has to do with short-term profits for defense contractors. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And you and I need to think about this. It's very depressing, but it's better to just own it than we can be smart about it. And I'll talk to you about that in a moment. We don't have a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We have a government of the health insurance companies, of the big pharmaceutical companies, of the gun manufacturers, of the oil and gas companies, of the chemical companies, of the food companies, of the defense contractors. It is of, by, and for the corporations. Now, this is the deal. If you go to the doctor, you want the doctor to heal you. But if the doctor is to heal you, the doctor is going to have to be honest with you if the test results don't come back good. I'm not a politician who's going to pretend to you this stuff's not happening. I'm not going to talk to you like you're 12 years old. I'm not going to talk to you about only the things that I think you want because then maybe you'll vote for me. I'm not here for that. That is childish. It is corrupt. And if it continues, it is ultimately dangerous. I spent 35 years up close and personal with people living through crisis, and this is what I know. I know this from working with others, and I know this from living my own life. We're not children. We're adults. And anyone in this room, if God forbid, if the doctor came back and told you it's cancer, somebody tells you your child is addicted, it's heroin, somebody told you, I can't save the business, it's over, you're going bankrupt. My experience of people is that in the first 5 minutes, all the stupid, superficial preoccupations that we allow to dominate our lives just fall away. And you see how smart and intelligent and noble people are. If I told you that, sir, you'd look at me, take it in, and then we talk, what are we going to do? What kind of treatment are we going to have? And you'd listen really hard, and you'd be really smart. People are not stupid. And that is what bothers me most about the conventional political establishment. They talk to us like we're stupid, because that is what they have thought is what wins votes. You dumb it down, dumb it down, dumb it down, so more people will agree with you. That's not the game I'm playing here. We need to get real, we need to get deep, and that kind of conviction is a force multiplier. What I say to you is America has some serious problems, but the opportunity to solve them, those opportunities are unlimited. Yes. We can have the best chapter ever, and I'll tell you something. Once again, from my own experience and my experience working with so many other people, it is often after a crisis that you're better than ever. This country can be better than ever. We've gotten off course. This is really serious, the ways we've gotten off course. And we have to be serious, and we have to be intelligent, and it's not something where if you just elect the right president, that's going to fix it. I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. I want to go to Washington and co-create with you. Because what we have to do in Washington, you have to do in New Hampshire, you have to do in Manchester, you have to do in Bedford, you have to do in Concord. This is deep into the sinews of the way we function. We have to reclaim the word citizen. You know, when Harry Truman went back to Missouri, they said, what does it feel like to no longer be president? He said, now I have the biggest job of any. I have the job of citizen. That's what it means to be an immune cell. So I'm telling you, if you elect me president, you're going to know exactly what I'm going to want to do. I want to repeal that 2017 tax cut. I want to put back in the middle class tax cut. I want to close those corporate loopholes. I want the United States government to be able to negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies. I also want the power of the Food and Drug Administration, the powers of the Centers of Disease Control to be returned to the power of the people so that they're not playing footsies under the table so much with big pharma and health insurance companies. I want the FAA to not be playing footsies under the table with Boeing. And I want our military industrial complex to back off, because I want our military establishment to get every dollar that they need for legitimate security concerns. But you can't just take medicine, you also have to cultivate health. We can't just endlessly prepare for war. We have to cultivate peace. And so I want all the peace-building agencies in the State Department, the diplomacy, the humanitarian aid, all of those people who actually provide the skill sets and the practices and the projects which really create peace. You create peace by expanding economic opportunities for women, reducing violence against women, expanding educational opportunities for children, and reducing unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. What do you think those people coming up here from Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras? It's human despair that causes these societal dysfunctions and even malfunctions. But at this point, the greatest societal malfunction is us, that we seem to have forgotten what America is for. So, when I'm president of the United States, we will have a Department of Peace, because I want the peace builders within the State Department and the United States Institute of Peace to be on equal par with power with our national security. I want a United States Department of Children and Youth. It is unacceptable that 25% of all the children in northern New Hampshire go to school, go to sleep at night food insecure. It is unacceptable that millions of American children live in chronic trauma. This is unacceptable. We need a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. And that, all those things, when you ask me how we're going to pay for them, first of all, I already told you how we're going to pay for them. You do all the things that I said, plus 3% on the assets of billionaires and 2% on the assets of 50 million and more, many of whom agree with us. You know what's going to happen then? We're going to have some cash on hand, and we're going to do right by the American people. And that is going to grow the U.S. economy. Because when you have 40% of all Americans living with chronic economic tension and anxiety, they're not showing up happy at work. They're not showing up happy as employers or employees. They're like this. Who can spread their wings? All these young people with those college loans, all they want to do is be capitalists. All they want to do is get in there. All they want to do is they wish they had $2,500 in discretionary spending that they could start their own website and so forth. We are capping people's dreams. That is not the role of government to thwart people's dreams. It is the role of government to unleash people's dreams. And if I'm President of the United States, that will be the guiding principle of every domestic and international policy. That which will help people thrive. Because you know what? That's where peace comes from. That's where peace comes from, and that's where prosperity comes from. Now, let me just conclude by saying one other issue, which is a major pillar of my campaign and what I see as a moral politics. I want to be President of the United States because I want to help this country navigate through this very turbulent time. I want to help this country end one aberrational chapter of our history and begin something greater than anything that we have ever had. But that will happen because we have humbled ourselves before truths that are our highest law of all. And those are moral laws. And one of the transformational principles which apply to a shift and a change, whether it's in our individual lives or as groups, is the realization that you can't have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to America's relationship with blacks who are descendants of American slaves, and when it comes to Native Americans, let's clean it up. Let's clean it up so we can begin again. After 250 years of slavery and another 100 years of institutionalized violence against blacks in America, we did pass the Civil Rights Act, which ended segregation. Civil War obviously abolished slavery. Civil Rights Act 100 years later abolished segregation. 1 year after that, 1965, the Voting Rights Act. But the Voting Rights Act started being chipped away at in 2013 by the John Roberts-led Supreme Court, which is why we have all these voter suppression efforts around the country right now. An issue, ladies and gentlemen, that simply has not been dealt with yet has to do with the economic gap that existed at the end of the Civil War. Now, the United States government, Tecumseh Sherman, promised every former slave family of 4, 40 acres and a mule. And once again, I'd like you to join with me in not just hearing the facts with your head, but feeling them with your heart. You're told one day, you're not a slave anymore. Think how incredible that would be. But where are you supposed to go? What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to feed yourself? How are you supposed to feed your children? Well, there were around 12 years when we could have had a shot at real social justice. But once the federal troops were withdrawn from the South, that were placed there to ensure that slavery would not be reinstituted, throughout the South they passed what were called black code laws to ensure subpar economic and social and political opportunity for black people. What followed was an era of domestic violence. What do you call lynchings if not domestic terror? What do you call Ku Klux Klan if not domestic terror? What do you call segregation if not domestic terror? So we're talking all in all, ladies and gentlemen, of 350 years of institutionalized violence against black people. I think we'd all agree that morally, if you've been kicking someone to the ground, and certainly kicking someone to the ground for 350 years, is serious kicking. At the end of that, you do not just have the moral responsibility to stop kicking. You also have a moral responsibility to say, here, let me help you get back up. Now, I'm Jewish, and since World War II, the German government has given $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations. And it doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but those reparations and also the promise that all German children would be brought up in perpetuity, every generation learning about what really happened in the Holocaust. Those reparations and that guarantee has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. And in 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the American Civil Liberties Act, all the surviving prisoners from the Japanese internment camps during World War II were given in 1988 between $20,000 and $22,000. So the idea of one people that has wronged another people paying economic restitution is not a fringe idea. And it shouldn't be considered a fringe idea. And one of the reasons I feel so strongly about this is because I remember being in Germany 30 years ago. And, you know, it wasn't the generation right after World War II is not the one that started with the reparations. It was the one after that. Germany knew they needed to clean this up with the Jews. If you went to Germany 30 years ago, you had a feeling among young Germans that they were carrying all this Holocaust guilt. You don't feel it anymore. You don't feel it anymore, and I'll tell you why. Because Germany has done a full-on mea culpa. And it's like in an individual life. You atone, you make amends. I believe in redemption. I believe in redemption for nations, just like I believe in redemption for individuals. You don't find Jews caring stuff about Germany. Even in Israel, you don't. As a Jewish friend, an Israeli friend of mine said, evil could happen anywhere. But it was because Germany did it, they cleaned it up. You clean it up. And if you look at that, and World War II was over in 1945, our Civil War was over in 1865. And we are still passing the baton of horror and guilt and toxicity and emotional turbulence generation to generation to generation. I want to be president of the United States on whose watch it can be said, you know what? We cleaned it up. Doesn't mean slavery didn't happen. Doesn't mean it will fix everything. It's obviously multidimensional. Same with Native Americans, ladies and gentlemen. This is the poorest of the poor population. I'm sure we're all very aware of the genocide and the cultural annihilation. We're talking here about unfairly negotiated treaties. We're talking about broken treaties. We're talking about the Bakken pipeline. We're talking about corporate exploitation of land. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, we're better than this. We don't have to be in denial about this, and we don't have to acquiesce to a political system that doesn't want to talk to you about those things because it assumes you're too selfish to care. It assumes you can't handle a deep conversation. It assumes that if they say anything negative to you, you won't vote for them. You know what I think? I think if the house is burning down, there's nothing negative about yelling fire. I'm talking to you like adults. I'm saying we need in this country a season of repair. We need a national endeavor. We need an era of season of repair. We're going to repair this earth. We're going to do way more than just re-enter the Paris Climate Accords. We're going to be a leader, a world leader in reversing climate change. We are going to be a moral leader internationally again. And you know what's going to happen when we do all those things that I've mentioned to you today? We think, oh, we're so tired. We're so weary because we've all got so much to do. You know what? That's not why we're tired and weary. We're tired and weary not because we're doing too much. We're tired and weary because we're not doing enough of things that matter. This country, the American citizen, is hardwired. We are hardwired for great things. Americans are hardwired for doing big things, great things. It's like an airplane. You see it in the sky, it's like, wow. You see it on the runway, it's kind of this clunky piece of metal. It's like a sports car. You know, you see it on the road, it's like no big deal. You see it on the highway, it's like, whoa. Enough with the incremental change. It won't make a fundamental difference anyway. Enough with just hoping, well, you know, that's what the American citizen has become, someone whose biggest hope is pretty please, pretty please. When I heard at a Black Chambers of Commerce the other day, they asked me, it was heartbreaking to me. They were saying, you know, Ms. Williamson, under Obama, they said, you know, even when black citizens get minority contracts from the government, they still could go bankrupt because it would take the government so long to pay them. And so they said under Obama, there was a rule, a quick pay rule, that said the government, if you had a business contract with the government had to pay you back within 2 weeks. They said, but under Trump, that bill has been repealed. Would you, Ms. Williamson, if you're president, would you promise that that would be put back so that minority businesses could get paid on time? I thought to myself, that's what it's come to. That's the most we can ask for. something's really wrong here. That the most we can ask for from our government is, if I've done the work, could you pay me on time? We need to do the same thing they said in 1776 to that nonsense. Hell no, we're not doing it that way. We're going somewhere else. And I read a book that said, some of us know what that book is. Life begins to change on the day you consider the possibility there might be another way. There's another way, ladies and gentlemen. Make me president of this world. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so